America's most dangerous ex-officer, the Christopher Dorner manhunt. Christopher Jordan Dorner was born on June 4th, 1979, in New York, but grew up under the bright, often unforgiving sun of Southern California. His mother was a kind and composed woman, a nurse who believed in discipline and dignity. His father, a man of quiet authority, worked hard to instill in his son a simple code: be honest, stand for what's right, and protect those who can't protect themselves. Those lessons would define Dorner's life, and ultimately, his fall. As a boy, Christopher was quiet but observant. He hated bullies, even in elementary school. Once, when another student taunted a classmate with racial slurs, Dorner stepped in, fists clenched, and ended the confrontation with a shove that sent the bully sprawling. Later, when the principal asked him why he did it, he said, "Because no one else would." It was a small moment, but one that captured who he believed himself to be: a defender of justice in a world too willing to look away. By his teenage years, Dorner's sense of right and wrong had hardened into something more rigid. He was driven, focused, and had little patience for hypocrisy. Friends described him as a serious guy, maybe too serious. He excelled in sports, particularly football, and was fascinated by the military. The structure, the order, the clarity of purpose, those things called to him. After high school, Dorner joined the U.S. Navy Reserve while attending college. It was a world where merit mattered, where orders were followed, and loyalty was rewarded. He thrived in that environment. His superiors noted his dedication and attention to detail. He became a marksman, trained in combat tactics, and served honorably for years. In uniform, Dorner found identity. But he also began to see the world in stark contrasts: heroes and villains, truth and lies, justice and corruption. There was little room for nuance. When he joined the Los Angeles Police Department in 2005, he saw it as the next step in his mission to serve and protect. The LAPD, still haunted by the ghosts of the Rodney King era and accusations of racial bias, was trying to rebuild its reputation. Dorner believed he could be part of that change. He entered the academy determined to be the kind of officer his father would be proud of. He studied hard, trained relentlessly, and graduated with a sense of purpose. But from the moment he began patrol duty, Dorner saw things that unsettled him. He claimed that racial slurs were still whispered in hallways, that certain officers treated suspects with open contempt. He was idealistic, perhaps naive, but his moral compass was unyielding. Then came the incident that changed everything. In 2007, while still on probationary status, Dorner and his training officer, Teresa Evans, responded to a call involving a mentally ill man. The details would later become the center of a storm that destroyed his career. According to Dorner, Officer Evans used excessive force, kicking the suspect in the face while he was handcuffed. Dorner reported the incident, believing he was doing the right thing, but his report set off a chain reaction inside the LAPD. Evans denied the allegation. Her version of events was backed by other officers. Soon, the investigation turned against Dorner himself. Internal Affairs questioned his credibility, accusing him of fabricating the story to damage a superior. Dorner refused to back down. He insisted he was telling the truth, that the system was trying to silence him. In 2008, the department fired him, citing false statements. For Dorner, it was more than a professional setback. It was a betrayal of everything he believed in. His name, his reputation, his honor, all gone. He appealed the decision, taking the case to court. But every attempt failed. Each denial deepened his anger. He watched as his dream of being a police officer slipped away, replaced by the gnawing belief that the system was rigged. Friends noticed the change. He became isolated, withdrawn, and obsessed with the case. He spoke of racism, corruption, and hypocrisy within the LAPD. He spent nights rereading documents, replaying every hearing in his mind, convinced that he was the victim of a vast injustice. In public, he kept up appearances, still serving in the Navy, still disciplined, but inside resentment was building. Years later, when investigators examined his digital files, they found drafts of letters, angry rants, and notes about his experiences at LAPD. The seeds of his manifesto were already there. By 2012, Dorner's life had fractured. He was discharged honorably from the Navy but had no stable job, no family of his own, and few friends. His world had narrowed to a single obsession: exposing what he believed to be the truth about the Los Angeles Police Department. The breaking point came in early 2013. On February 3rd, Monica Kwan, the daughter of Randall Kwan, Dorner's former police union representative, and her fiancé, Keith Lawrence, were found shot dead in their car in Irvine, California. The killing shocked everyone. There was no robbery, no struggle. But investigators soon connected the dots. A chilling manifesto appeared online, a lengthy, furious letter written by Christopher Dorner. He declared war on the LAPD. In it, Dorner wrote that he had no other choice but to take violent action after years of injustice. He accused specific officers and supervisors by name. He described his firing as an act of retaliation for exposing police brutality. And he vowed revenge, not just against those he blamed, but against their families. The manifesto was detailed, personal, and methodical. It read like a military operation combined with a moral crusade. Dorner saw himself as a soldier in a just war, fighting corruption with the only tools left to him. "I am not a murderer," he wrote. "I am a man who was made to feel that his name and integrity were worth nothing. I will not be silent anymore." Within 24 hours, Southern California erupted into chaos. Police officers were placed under protective watch. Families of named individuals were relocated. Roadblocks went up across the state. Helicopters hovered over neighborhoods. Every cop in the region was suddenly both hunter and prey. But Dorner, trained, disciplined, and driven, was already moving. When the manifesto surfaced online on February 7th, 2013, it sent shockwaves through Southern California and the entire nation. The words were clear, articulate, and terrifyingly specific. Dorner's grievances against the LAPD were mixed with personal addresses to individual officers, politicians, journalists, and even celebrities. He praised those he admired: Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton, Chris Christie, Bill Cosby before his later scandal, and condemned those he blamed for injustice. But amid the tangents and odd digressions, one message was unmistakable. He intended to kill anyone he held responsible for ruining his life. Law enforcement mobilized instantly. Hundreds of officers from multiple agencies, LAPD, the FBI, U.S. Marshals, and local sheriff's departments, launched what would become one of the largest manhunts in California history. They called it Operation Dorner. At 1:30 a.m. on February 7, 2013, two LAPD officers were driving in Corona, California, assigned to protect someone named in Dorner's manifesto. Out of the darkness, bullets ripped through their vehicle. The officers returned fire but couldn't see the shooter. Dorner had missed them by inches. Minutes later, about 20 miles away in Riverside, two other officers were ambushed at a red light. Dorner pulled up alongside their patrol car and opened fire. One officer, Michael Crane, was killed instantly. His partner was critically wounded. By dawn, every cop in California knew Dorner's name. Photos of him in uniform, smiling, clean-cut, proud, flashed across TV screens. To the public, he looked like an ordinary officer. To the police, he was now the enemy. LAPD Chief Charlie Beck announced a state of emergency. "This is a man who has targeted our officers and their families. We will use every resource available to bring him to justice." The department offered a $1 million reward, later increased by private donations. It was one of the largest bounties in LAPD history. But despite the manhunt, Dorner seemed to vanish. For the next several days, panic spread through Southern California. Police cars roamed the streets with lights flashing. SWAT teams raided homes based on vague tips. Helicopters circled the skies day and night. The fear ran so deep that even officers were jumpy, and it showed. On February 7th, LAPD officers guarding a house in Torrance mistook a blue Toyota Tacoma for Dorner's gray Nissan Titan. They opened fire without warning, riddling the vehicle with more than 100 bullets. Inside were two women delivering newspapers, Margie Carranza and Emma Hernandez. Both survived, though Hernandez was shot twice in the back. Hours later, a similar incident occurred when another group of officers fired on a different truck driven by David Perdue, a white male who looked nothing like Dorner. His vehicle was also destroyed, but he escaped unharmed. The public began to question whether the LAPD had lost control. The irony was bitter. The very department Dorner accused of recklessness and prejudice was now acting with panic and poor judgment. For Dorner, watching from the shadows, it was proof that everything he had written was true. Investigators later pieced together a chilling portrait of Dorner's movements during those days. He used his Navy training to stay ahead of law enforcement, changing vehicles, using snow-covered back roads, and hiding in mountainous terrain. He knew police tactics, their response times, and how to track their radio chatter. He had planned meticulously. In his manifesto, he had listed the equipment he carried: rifles, pistols, body armor, camouflage, even police radios. He had also mailed a hard drive to CNN commentator Anderson Cooper, containing evidence and grievances that he claimed proved his innocence. But beneath the tactical precision, there was a sense of unraveling. Dorner's writings revealed not only anger but despair, a man convinced that his life had been destroyed and that violence was the only way to reclaim his name. He wrote of asymmetric warfare, but also of wanting the truth to be known, even if he died for it. On February 8th, police found Dorner's burned-out Nissan Titan near Big Bear Lake, a snowy mountain resort 2 hours east of Los Angeles. The truck had weapons, camping gear, and a broken rifle inside. It looked like he had fled into the wilderness. Big Bear, normally a peaceful ski destination, transformed overnight into a fortress. Schools were closed, roads blocked, and residents told to lock their doors. SWAT teams combed through cabins and forests, but found nothing. Some believed he had died in the fire. Others thought he was long gone. But Dorner was still alive, hiding in plain sight. For days, he lay low, surviving in an empty vacation cabin. He ate canned food, watched the news on a small television, and listened to police scanners. He saw his face plastered across every screen in America. He heard the LAPD swear they would catch him dead or alive. It was the perfect irony. The organization he once swore to protect now hunted him like prey. After nearly a week of silence, Dorner reappeared on February 12th. Around 12:20 p.m., 2 wardens from the California Fish and Wildlife Department spotted a gray pickup truck matching his description. A chase ensued through the snow-covered roads of Big Bear. Dorner fired several rounds at the officers, hitting their vehicle but causing no injuries. He then fled to a cabin near Seven Oaks Road. 2 San Bernardino County deputies arrived at the scene and exchanged gunfire with him. One deputy, Jeremiah McKay, was fatally shot. Another was wounded. As backup units surrounded the cabin, the standoff began. Hundreds of officers encircled the area. Reporters gathered at roadblocks miles away. Helicopters hovered overhead. Through binoculars and sniper scopes, police could see flashes of movement inside the cabin. Dorner was armed and unrelenting. Negotiators tried to reach him, but he did not respond. He knew there was no way out. Then, as dusk fell, a single gunshot echoed from inside the cabin, followed by smoke. Within minutes, the structure was engulfed in flames. There was confusion about what had caused the blaze. Some claimed tear gas canisters. Others said pyrotechnic smoke devices ignited the fire. Officers outside reported hearing another gunshot just before the flames consumed the building. When the fire finally burned out, investigators entered the smoldering remains. Inside, they found a charred body and a wallet containing Christopher Dorner's driver's license. An autopsy confirmed what most had already assumed. Dorner had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The manhunt was over. The state breathed a collective sigh of relief, but the questions that followed were uneasy and complex. Was Dorner purely a murderer, or a symptom of deeper corruption within the LAPD? Chief Charlie Beck faced immediate scrutiny. During a press conference, he stated, "The department has its flaws, but no grievance justifies the killing of innocents." Yet he also acknowledged that Dorner's accusations about racism and retaliation deserved review. The LAPD reopened the investigation into his firing, if only to prove that it had nothing to hide. For the families of the victims, Monica Kwan, Keith Laurent, Officer Michael Crane, and Deputy Jeremiah McKay, the outcome was bittersweet. Their loved ones were gone, their names tied forever to a tragedy that began with one man's sense of betrayal. In the weeks that followed, television pundits debated the meaning of Dorner's rampage. Some portrayed him as a madman consumed by vengeance. Others described him as a broken man whose faith in justice had been destroyed. On the internet, a strange cult of admiration emerged. Memes circulated calling him a real-life Rambo or the man who fought the system. Others condemned those posts as grotesque glorification of violence. The truth was more complicated. Christopher Dorner's story was not one of simple villainy. It was a collision of ideals, of a man who believed in justice so absolutely that he could not bear to see it tainted. When he lost faith in the very institution he had sworn to serve, his moral compass imploded. Psychologists later called it moral injury, the psychological trauma that occurs when deeply held beliefs about right and wrong are shattered. For Dorner, it wasn't just the loss of a job. It was the loss of identity, of purpose, of self. The LAPD, meanwhile, had its own reckoning. The Dorner case reignited debates about racism, internal politics, and accountability. Though the review of his termination found no new evidence to overturn the decision, Chief Beck admitted that the department's handling of internal complaints needed reform. In the years that followed, LAPD implemented new oversight policies, improved whistleblower protections, and increased training on racial bias. But for many, it was too little, too late. Dorner had wanted his name cleared. Instead, it became infamous. By the time the ashes cooled in Big Bear, 4 people were dead and several more wounded. Millions of dollars in property damage, lawsuits, and settlements followed. The city of Los Angeles paid nearly $4.2 million to the two women mistakenly shot in Torrance. The LAPD, humbled and haunted, became more cautious in how it handled internal dissent. Officers whispered that Dorner's ghost still lingered, a reminder of how unchecked anger and institutional failure can combine into tragedy. Years later, documentaries, podcasts, and articles continued to revisit the case. They examined not just the violence, but the system that created the conditions for it. Christopher Dorner had believed he was fighting corruption. But in the end, he became the very thing he hated, a man who justified evil in the name of good. The flames at Big Bear burned out long before the questions did. When investigators sifted through the ashes of the cabin where Christopher Dorner made his last stand, they found fragments of weapons, spent shell casings, and the warped metal of a police radio. Near the blackened fireplace lay a single .45 caliber handgun, the weapon used to end his life. It was a strange quiet that followed. Reporters who had spent days chasing rumors across Southern California stood outside the yellow-taped perimeter as snow fell silently over the charred ruin. For a week, Dorner's name had been shouted across every news channel. Now it was spoken only in hushed tones, as if the world itself was exhausted. The LAPD issued a statement confirming his death. Chief Charlie Beck called it the conclusion of a tragic chapter. But even as he spoke, the contradictions were already forming. To some, Dorner was nothing more than a murderer. To others, he was a whistleblower driven mad by injustice. The truth, messy, human, and uncomfortable, lay somewhere between those extremes. The list of victims was short but devastating. Monica Kwan and Keith Lawrence, two young people just beginning their lives, murdered in a parking garage because of their family connection to Dorner's grievance. Officer Michael Crane, a husband and father, shot during what should have been a routine patrol. Deputy Jeremiah McKay, killed during the final shootout. Each of them represented the ordinary people Dorner once swore to protect. Their funerals were attended by hundreds of officers, friends, and family. At each service, the grief was heavy, but the confusion heavier. How could someone who wore the same badge, who spoke of honor and truth, have turned his weapon on his own? At Crane's funeral, his widow said softly he believed in what the badge stood for. I hope someday people will remember that more than the man who betrayed it. The LAPD, already under a microscope, struggled to balance mourning with introspection. They launched internal reviews, reopened old files, and promised transparency. But the damage to public trust was deep. For many Angelenos, the Dorner case confirmed what they had long suspected, that beneath the uniforms and mission statements, there was still something broken within the department's culture. In the weeks after the standoff, the internet erupted with debate. Twitter threads, Facebook posts, and online forums buzzed with conflicting emotions. Some users condemned Dorner as a cold-blooded killer. Others called him a symbol, a man pushed too far by hypocrisy and racism. Memes spread with slogans like Dorner was right, and he fought the system. It was a disturbing phenomenon. Psychologists noted that many who defended Dorner weren't just supporting his actions, but identifying with his sense of betrayal, the feeling of being punished for telling the truth or standing up to authority. The digital age had turned him into a kind of anti-hero, detached from the reality of his crimes. In downtown Los Angeles, protesters gathered with signs demanding reform in the LAPD. Some carried posters reading, "Listen to what drove him." Others, including police unions and families of the victims, saw those demonstrations as an insult to the dead. "You don't honor a murderer," one officer said bitterly. "You fix the problems without turning him into a martyr." Still, the conversation had begun, and it would not fade easily. To understand Dorner, forensic psychologists later pieced together his personality from interviews, records, and the long, rambling manifesto he left behind. He was intelligent, disciplined, and deeply moral, but rigid. In military terms, he was a man built for structure, where right and wrong were clear and consequences followed rules. When he entered the LAPD and encountered a world of politics, favoritism, and quiet prejudice, that moral framework began to crack. Experts described what he suffered as cognitive dissonance, the painful clash between deeply held beliefs and the realities he perceived. For Dorner, loyalty and justice were sacred. When the institution he served seemed to betray those ideals, he experienced it not as frustration, but as a moral injury. Dr. Catherine Redding, a psychologist who studied the case, explained it this way. When someone defines themselves entirely by service and integrity, and that identity is taken away unjustly, or even feels unjustly taken, the psychological fallout can be catastrophic. Dorner didn't lose a job. He lost the story he told himself about who he was. In his manifesto, Dorner wrote of honor, respect, and fairness, the very values he claimed to defend. But he also wrote about killing the families of his enemies, about terminating targets. The contradiction was jarring. To many analysts, it showed a man split in two. The officer who wanted to fix the system and the soldier who believed the only way to do it was through destruction. For the LAPD, Dorner's rampage became both a stain and a lesson. Chief Beck ordered a comprehensive review of Dorner's termination. The investigation found no evidence of racial bias or conspiracy. The decision to fire him, the report concluded, had followed procedure. But the department didn't stop there. In the months that followed, the LAPD introduced new whistleblower protections, strengthened its internal affairs oversight, and launched programs aimed at improving trust between officers and minority communities. None of it brought back the dead, but the effort marked a rare moment of introspection. Inside the force, however, the emotions were mixed. Some officers despised Dorner, calling him a traitor who'd put every cop in the state at risk. Others, quietly, admitted that parts of his manifesto hit uncomfortably close to home: the politics, the favoritism, the code of silence. One veteran sergeant later said anonymously he was right about some things, just not about how he handled them. In Irvine, the Kwan family tried to live with an unbearable contradiction: that Monica's murder was not random, but the calculated first move in a war declared by a man their father once tried to help. Randall Kwan, Dorner's former LAPD union representative, was tormented by guilt. He had defended Dorner during his appeal, argued his case, and ultimately failed to save his job. Dorner had called him a traitor in the manifesto. Friends said Kwan never recovered fully from the tragedy. Elsewhere in Riverside, Officer Crane's children grew up with only faint memories of their father, family photographs, a folded flag, and stories told by his fellow officers. Deputy McKay's colleagues in San Bernardino still wear wristbands bearing his badge number each February. These were the lives that Dorner's crusade consumed. The Dorner case became a study in how modern media transforms violence into spectacle. For days, news helicopters followed police convoys while anchors speculated about his next move. Some outlets even played audio from police scanners live, blurring the line between coverage and participation. The narrative shifted constantly, from fear to fascination, from condemnation to reluctant empathy. A year later, documentaries and books began to appear. Some focused on the police response, the massive, chaotic manhunt, and the mistaken shootings of civilians. Others examined Dorner's grievances, trying to separate the legitimate from the delusional. The pattern was familiar. America has always been drawn to outlaws who claim a cause. From Jesse James to Edward Snowden, the line between criminal and crusader often blurs in public memory. But Dorner's case was different. His victims weren't symbols of oppression or power. They were ordinary people. Whatever truth he hoped to reveal was buried beneath their blood. In the years following the incident, the legal aftermath unfolded quietly. The city of Los Angeles settled with the newspaper carriers who had been shot by mistake. $4.2 million for Emma Hernandez and Margie Carranza. Another $40,000 went to David Perdue, the man whose truck had been riddled with bullets. The settlements were acknowledgments of fear, haste, and overreaction, the same flaws Dorner had accused the department of harboring. The LAPD refused to name the officers involved in those mistaken shootings, citing safety concerns, but they were temporarily removed from field duty. No criminal charges were filed. By 2014, the case had faded from headlines. The world had moved on. But every February, in small police memorials and online discussions, his name resurfaced, not as a hero or a villain, but as a warning. What makes the story of Christopher Dorner endure isn't just the violence. It's the sense of moral confusion it left behind. He believed himself to be a man of integrity fighting against corruption. Yet in doing so, he became the very embodiment of the injustice he despised. His tragedy lies in that paradox, the belief that righteousness could justify murder. In a letter recovered from his burned truck, he wrote, "I am a man who has lost complete faith in the system. When the system fails you, you are forced to create your own." Those words encapsulated his dissent. The system did fail him in some ways, through bureaucratic coldness, a culture that discouraged dissent, and a process that left him voiceless. But his response destroyed any moral ground he hoped to stand on. 10 years later, scholars, journalists, and officers still debate what the Dorner case revealed. For law enforcement, it became a reminder that institutions must not only uphold justice, but embody it, especially for those within. For psychologists, it illustrated how moral injury and isolation can metastasize into violence. And for the public, it raised uncomfortable questions about faith in authority, race, and what happens when trust collapses. A criminologist writing in The Atlantic summarized it best. Dorner was not a monster born of evil. He was a man built by ideals that his world could not sustain. His story is not about vengeance, it is about disillusionment. The snow still falls each winter on Big Bear Lake, covering the remains of the cabin where it ended. Hikers pass by without knowing what once happened there. The forest has reclaimed its silence. But in police academies across California, instructors still reference the Dorner case. They speak not only about the tactics of the manhunt, but about ethics, identity, and the fragile line between duty and obsession. They remind recruits that integrity must never become pride, that the badge is a symbol, not a shield for one's ego. Somewhere in that lesson lies the essence of Christopher Dorner's story, a man who wanted to prove he was right, even if it meant setting the world on fire. He died believing he had reclaimed his honor, but all he left behind was smoke.